Shalom! My name is Miss Tracy, and I'm here to tell you about the Jewish holiday of Passover, also referred to as Pesach. Passover celebrates the Hebrews' liberation from slavery in ancient Egypt, and the holiday is celebrated over the course of 1 week in the spring during the Hebrew month of Nisan. During this week, all chametz, or anything containing leaven, which is the agent that causes bread or other baked items to rise, is prohibited, and only unleavened bread, called matzah, may be eaten. This is matzah. Chametz includes anything made from the 5 major grains, including wheat, rye, barley, oats, and spelt, that has not been completely cooked within 18 minutes after coming into contact with water. In fact, Jews are not only prohibited from eating chametz during Passover, but they also may not possess any items containing chametz in their household. The matzah symbolizes both the suffering of the Jewish people while slaves in Egypt and the haste with which they fled Egypt in the course of the Great Exodus, which I will explain later in the history part of this informational video. Passover is traditionally celebrated with a ceremonial meal on the first night, sometimes the first 2 nights of the holiday, together with family and friends. This meal is called a seder, meaning order, because there is a specific set of tasks that must be completed and information that must be covered in a specific order. To correctly follow the process, the text of the Passover Seder is written in a book called the Haggadah. At the Seder, foods that symbolize the Hebrews' liberation from slavery are eaten, and specific prayers and traditional recitations are performed. We come together with our loved ones to celebrate the great lessons of the story of our ancestors. These lessons are the blessing of freedom and the reminder that since we were once slaves and we were then freed, it is our responsibility now to work for freedom for all people everywhere. On Passover Seder tables, you may see a partitioned plate containing small amounts of specific foods. Each food is symbolic for an aspect of Passover. A roasted shank bone represents the Pesach sacrifice. An egg represents spring and the circle of life. Bitter herbs represent the bitterness of slavery. Charoset, which is an applesauce-like mixture with wine, nuts, and spices, represents the mortar used by the Jews in Egypt. Karpas, or greens, such as parsley, represents the spring. Also placed on the table are 3 pieces of matzah, salt water to represent the tears of the slaves, a ceremonial wine glass called a Kiddush cup, and on the chairs you may see pillows. This is because at Passover you are supposed to recline at the table as a reminder of being free. The night's telling can be long, so to engage the interest and excitement of the children at the table, the afikomen is a fun hide-and-seek game played with a piece of broken matzah, and the one who finds it first wins a prize. Additionally, even the youngest family member is encouraged to actively participate in asking the 4 questions, an integral tradition in the Seder, often in the form of song, asking about the different Passover symbols, starting with the Hebrew words, Ma nishtana halayla hazeh, meaning, why is this night different from all other nights? Now time for our history lesson. Long ago, the Egyptian Pharaoh feared that the Hebrew people would one day rise up against him. Already slaves to him, he declared that all sons born to Israelite women should be killed at birth. One brave Israelite woman spared her newborn son by placing him in a basket and set him floating down the Nile River, where he was found by the Pharaoh's daughter, who took him in, named him Moses, and raised him as her own. Fast forward into the future. As an adult, Moses developed compassion for the Israelite people and was chosen by God to free them from slavery and lead them out of Egypt. Moses went to Pharaoh and demanded that Pharaoh free the Jews by saying, "Let my people go," but Pharaoh refused. God then told Moses that, as proof of God's power, the Egyptians would suffer a series of plagues until Pharaoh agreed to let the Jews go. The plagues endured were turning the water of the Nile into blood, frogs, lice, wild beasts, cattle disease, boils, hail, locusts, darkness, and the slaying of the Egyptian firstborn. During the last plague, God killed the firstborn of each Egyptian family, but passed over the houses of the Israelites, who had marked their doors with sacrificial lamb's blood, leaving their children unharmed. And this is where the holiday got its name, Passover. With this final and brutal plague, the grieving Pharaoh relented and finally let the Israelites go. With haste, they quickly packed and left Egypt with no time for their bread to rise, hence the holiday's restriction on eating leavened or risen grain products, giving us the tradition of eating matzah. Soon thereafter, Pharaoh regretted his decision and sent his army after the Jews. But with the Red Sea ahead of them and nowhere else to go, God told Moses to stretch his staff over the sea, and the waters parted, allowing the Jews to cross on dry land. Just as they reached the far shore of the sea, the waters then closed, drowning Pharaoh and his soldiers. Moses and all his people were saved and began their journey of freedom to the promised land of Israel through the desert. It's a lot of information I've given you with this holiday, and it's all just the shortened version. But don't worry if you can't keep it all straight, because Passover is a retelling of a story to generations, both old and new, year after year. Now, before I go, I'd like to sing with you a traditional Passover song called Dayenu. Toda rabah and lahitraot. Thanks, and I'll see you again soon.